what I know to be true is it's all about that deeper connection, that attunement. And all attunement means is I'm able to tune into you vibrationally and hold a space for you where I understand that you have the capacity to heal.
Thank you for joining us on another insightful episode of the Altered Life Podcast. In this episode, we sit down with TJ Woodward, a groundbreaking recovery specialist, speaker, and author. Listen in as we explore ways to rediscover your true self and embrace your brilliance. Connect with us as we look to harness the power of real human connection only on the Altered Life Podcast.
And if someone can understand who they really are and really tap into the preciousness of themselves, they can heal that. And so our job as a clinician, as a counselor, as a tech, as a therapist, or even as a friend, is to not see that person through the lens of their own brokenness, but to see them through the lens of what's possible. And in that holding, I have witnessed people having the courage to turn toward and heal trauma in ways that's so much more powerful than here's the blueprint, here are the steps that you need to take.
Connect with us as we look to harness the power of real human connection only on the Altered Life Podcast. All right. Well, welcome to season 3 of the Altered Life Podcast. Today we are blessed and fortunate to have TJ Woodward with us. TJ, I've been looking forward so much to this conversation and sharing with you this moment and hearing what you have to say about, what's on your heart. And I know that we are so strongly aligned, and I've learned a lot from you in a very brief time. We haven't had, a whole lot of time together, but the moments we've had together have been really meaningful to me. And so I can't wait to see what you share today and what we talk about. Is there anything that you would like the audience to know about you before we get into our conversation? Who are you? Give us a bio and things that you're most, you want the world to know about you as a human being.
Well, thank you. I first wanted to say how grateful I am to be here with you. And something that you just said, I think is so important, that even though we've had short amount of time, it's more about the depth of connection. Yes. And I know that's what you and I are most passionate about, that a lot can happen in 2 or 3 minutes. And yes. Sometimes I think we live in a world where we might feel too busy to pause and actually connect. And so I appreciate those moments with you over the last year or so that we've known each other. So I guess if I want anyone to know anything about me, it's that I found myself in a place where I didn't think I could stay on planet Earth. And I found a way to not only stay on planet Earth, but to thrive and to reconnect with my true nature. Another way to say that is, I was suicidal, and luckily, I think for myself, didn't choose that option, but found through a mentor a way of reconnecting with my true nature. And at some point, about 20 years ago, that became my life's purpose, to share that with the world. Wow. A lot in that. And similar to my story, I think. So I relate to it. Your life is filled with purpose and meaning, but you had to go through quite a bit to get to this place, I would imagine. So would you mind telling me a little bit about the story? What is how did you get to the place of desperation, to that point in your life where, you just didn't want to continue, you didn't want to go on anymore? What preceded that? Well, I'll go all the way back to my earliest memories. My earliest memories were memories of being open, loving, kind, grateful, connected. And I look at a pre-programmed human, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, they innately do what most of us are trying to achieve in a spiritual practice, right? The ability to be open, to feel their feelings, to love, to look at the world without judgment. And I remember that, and that's my earliest memory. And I remember that in such a powerful way because around the age 7, I also have a memory of my heart closing and becoming really afraid. And from that moment, until I discovered drugs and alcohol. So at 7 years old, I closed my heart. At 14, I discovered weed and alcohol. And at 21, I got sober. So it was these 7-year cycles. Oh, wow. But it was when I was around 18 months sober, actually, that I found myself feeling suicidal. And the reason for that is I hadn't really addressed anything. I had just stopped drinking, and I thought that was it. That's all I needed to do. But all of those issues, because at age 7, what really happened is I decided I was broken. And I think that is the fundamental message that I want to convey to the world now, which is there is a place within each of us that is whole and perfect. And that knowing, that understanding, I did not have. And that became the journey of my own rediscovery of that place within me that was that effervescent little kid.
This is the part of you that I just so adore and is so magnetic to me and so attractive. And I want to go into that more deeply.
Yeah.
But before we do that, something that you said to me is kind of very interesting. And that is there's a 7-year cycle. There's like the first 7 years, the following 7 years, and then another 7 years thereafter.
Yeah.
And this first 7-year window that you talk about is really interesting because it's very similar to something that I think I have experienced too. And you talk about the awareness of how loving and connection and just the different way of being when you were young.
Yeah.
You just a different way. And so what was that way? What was that way at that time? Not with what you know now, but tell me that first 7 years, the way it was for that young TJ, for the little TJ. What was little TJ like? What was the experience of little TJ?
Wow. Well, I mean, it reminds me of a story, actually, that's not specifically about me, but it actually speaks to what you're asking. I had a Vespa for many years in San Francisco, and I was on the corner in the Mission in San Francisco, and I was at a stoplight, and I looked over and saw this man with a small child on his shoulders, and the child was probably 3 or 4, and our eyes met, not the adult, of course, but the child, and our eyes, we stayed locked all the way as they crossed the intersection and down the street. And that connection was so palpable and so powerful, and I just felt my heart open and feel so much love for this little 3-year-old child. And that to me really speaks to what my experience of being a 3-year-old was: open, present, loving. And I think that's the innate experience of being human until we get taught things like, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, competition. I mean, I remember realizing my parents were in a loveless marriage. I remember being around my dad and his brothers who we would probably today call perpetrators. I remember witnessing my mom vacillating between depression and rage, seeing war on TV. So this openness, this effervescence, and I use that word because I just felt like a bright light. And I saw that in everyone. And then this experience closed my heart, and I at least believe that I lost access to that for many, many years.
I think those that are listening right now probably could relate to that. I think that the way of being when we come into this world is something that deserves exploration and understanding and insight. Before you got to the place where you shut off, you actually said, then I shut down. I think I shut off, right? So what was it like before you shut down? What was that way of being? Like, what is that, the purity, the wholesomeness, the wonderment of that being? What is that like? What is that, what do you think that is? There's a message there about just how we come into the world and how we have this already within us. What is that in your understanding?
There's so many different ways to frame it, right? I mean, in my language, I would say we come into the world as these infinite spiritual beings, right? With this absolute, so much love to share and to receive. And before we get programmed to believe all these other things about the world, like I remember my mom saying she realized that I was a very sensitive child. And that she became afraid of that and wanted to toughen me up to teach me the ways of the world. So that experience that I had prior to all of that was just absolute connection. I mean, I remember lying in my backyard and just mesmerized by a blade of grass. I could spend an hour looking at a blade of grass, like what created this, or watching ants, or seeing a butterfly. And it's that openness, that curiosity, and that presence that I think is the innate experience of being human. And, you know, our brains aren't developed. There might be something there, right? Because like now I'm so smart, of course, that I get sometimes in the way of just being super present, right? So there might be something there too, that it's just, we're in our essence at that point.
Yeah, we're just in such a wholesome, pure form, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sort of untainted.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of people believe the angels visit with the children. Maybe it's just because the children can actually see the angels, right?
Right.
And so, you know, life gets hard. It gets difficult. But are you under the belief that, you know, part of our journey is to rediscover how we were sort of initially brought into the world, and the purity within us and the beauty within us, and that ability to connect and to love and just be, you know, more attuned and loving? Is that kind of what, not to steal your thunder, but is that kind of what you've come to understand? To
me, that is the journey, right? It's the journey, and a lot of us think it's about moving towards something. I want to be more loving. I want to learn how to connect. I want to learn how to be present.
That's right.
But the truth is, it's not about learning that. It's about remembering that. And that's a fundamentally different way of framing it, right? Whether we're talking about recovery or spiritual practice or therapy or a wellness practice, all of it is about wanting to be more present, more in touch with who we are, more able to connect. And if we think I need to learn how to do that, rather than I want to remember that innate experience of that beingness that we are, that's a very different framework, because as Rumi said, our job is not to seek for love, but to look at the barriers we put on top of it. That's a very different framework. And to me, when I came into recovery, a lot of it was like, I need to learn how to.
Yeah.
And when I met this beautiful enlightened being named Mary Helen, who took me on a journey, she said, recovery is about unlearning. It's not about learning. And at first I was like, oh, that sounds great. On to the next thing. And then I came to understand the profound statement that is, and the truth of that in my own experience.
Beautiful. So you have this desire to rediscover what's already there. Is that correct? Is that kind of
to remember that's my natural state.
To remember, that's right.
Yeah.
So how do we forget? If that's our natural state, then going forward into your story, you know, the next 7 years, something happened where you forgot that natural state, and I'm sure it's a story that, you know, a lot of us share. What do you think happens? You know, what is that? What happened in your life, and what do you think, you know, in terms of a framework and understanding that you have come to? What goes on? How? Why? Like, because it's not like an unimportant question. It's an existential question for many of us, right? You fast forward, there was a point where you felt like ending it all, literally. And if you would have remembered this about yourself, I'm certain you wouldn't have come to that place. How did you forget? What happened?
Well, I think that's the journey of being born on planet Earth for whatever reason, right? We could like theorize on why we're here or how we got here. Did we choose to be here? Is this a low-level planet? You know, there's all these different things we think about. But I can remember, Michael, being a little kid when I was taught about heaven and hell. And just didn't seem true. But what I was aware of is that for some reason, I believe I was sent here. And I don't even know what that means, but I remember that as an experience. It's interesting because that resonated more for me as a little kid than it does as an adult, because I'm trying to figure it out as an adult. But I remember being a little kid and thinking, our job here is to love and to remember who we are. And that's really in the midst of war, in the midst of racism, in the midst of sexism, all the things that I experienced that caused me to be afraid. And yet that experience is who and what I am. And so what needs to be unlearned is one part of it, but also how do I spend time dedicating myself to re-experiencing that? Because we don't ever really disconnect from it. I just thought I did.
So why did you think you did?
Well, I mean, I just started believing all the things I was told. You know, boys do this. Boys don't act like a girl, don't talk like a girl, right? Mm-hmm. Men are scary. Like, that was true for me. My grandfather, who I loved dearly, was overtly racist. I didn't know what to do with that. I saw war on TV. My parents were clearly in a loveless marriage.
Which war did you see on TV?
Well, let's see. I was born in 1965, so there's always a war. I'm assuming it's
got you
Vietnam,
by 1 year.
Right?
It was the Vietnam War.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that
was
happened,
ever present back then.
ever present.
It was always on the tube, wasn't it?
Always on.
Yeah. We didn't have cable back then. We had a tube.
And we did not have phones with like instant access, and yet we were all glued to that TV.
Constantly.
Yeah.
That was the main appliance. That was the main feature in the living room, even more so than today, right? Because we
Agreed.
can go off on our own little phone and spend time with it by ourselves. But back then, we had to do that almost as a communal shared experience, right?
Yeah.
So this time that you were, going through this in this next phase, this next season of your life, there was a lot of things that were going on in the world, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff, and you were exposed to it. Do you think you were vulnerable to it? Do you think you were susceptible to it? Do you think because you were so loving and so sensitive and so kind that maybe you were a little bit more vulnerable? I mean, a little bit more at risk, if I can say that, to sort of, maybe an attack at the essence of who you truly are could be challenged. And does that resonate at all?
I think that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to believe is that that's true for each of us.
Yeah.
That we're all sensitive and open and kind and loving as a little child. And maybe we just start believing the program, the programming that we receive. I remember I was watching a parade one time, and there was a little boy. He was probably 4, and he was holding his dad's hand, and there were floats going by, and he started jumping up and down. There was so much enthusiasm. And I remember the dad looked at him and said, "Don't cheer for that float. That's not our team." And I saw the little kid just froze, and I could feel that freezing, and I related so much to it because there's so many messages in that, us and them, good and bad, our team, that don't get too excited. I mean, it's like these subtle things that are really not subtle at all.
Yeah, those things that are so insidious, right? They usually come across as benign, but they're not at all, to your point.
Yeah.
I think we see that in society today. I think it's we're constantly bombarded. I think, we thought we were being bombarded back then in the 60s and 70s with social unrest and, different factions and, political parties and conservatives and liberals and the feminist movement. Remember all these things that were going on, but today I think it all looks like child's play back then if we look at it from that lens. But it's a lot on the human condition. It's a lot. It really is.
It's interesting because I've been really present with this over the last few months. Earlier in the evolution of humanity, we needed to find a tribe in order to survive. So it becomes part of the DNA. We know now that we literally pass that DNA along, that we need to find our people.
Yeah.
But if we're going to evolve as spiritual beings, we don't come in with that. Like, we don't come in thinking that I'm different than you because of the color of your skin or how much money you do or don't have or how your parents vote, right? We get programmed to believe all of that. And then we end up looking for a group of people to feel safe. And that's why we try to find our tribe. And there's a reason for that, but there's also a time for us to move beyond that. And I want to believe that everything that's happening in the culture now is us looking at all of these systems so that they can start to crumble. And yet, on the other hand, I can see people getting even more deeply entrenched in them.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see that become even more intensified and more profound. I think that's almost like this inertia, this momentum over time, where it seems to be growing and growing and growing, and it's very effective, isn't it? If it has a mission or a goal, if it has an intention, it seems to me that it does. Whatever it is, it's doing a pretty good job, and it's really impacted the individual, impacted society, societal norms. I think we're becoming jaded to things that I would have never thought we would become jaded to. And I think back to your life, which I see as a tremendous miracle, a great story. And I'm so glad that your purpose, you talked about your purpose, is to really, speak that truth and to speak that message and to share your heart with others. I know people are being impacted by that, and what a gift. And so I commend you for doing that and for living that out and walking in that truth every day. People are being touched in many, many ways because of the work that you've done. So keep doing it. Keep doing it.
I'm so honored. I'm so grateful to hear that. And I do agree that has become my purpose, whether I like it or not. And what I mean by that is, there was a moment, and this was about 20 years ago, there was a moment when I realized that I had a deeper calling. And I believe that we all have this calling, actually, to be love on the planet, to be peace, to create connection. And yet, for whatever reason, when I had the knowing that was my purpose, of course, everything in my world fell apart at that point. That's a whole other story, which I'm very willing to share. But everything crumbled at that point, and I realized that was because I had said yes to a deeper calling. And when we think about, like the divisions that are happening, it's interesting because we try to find our tribe so that we can feel connected.
Yep.
And yet it's the very thing that creates the disconnection, right? The disconnection is I can't possibly relate to you if you have a different point of view or a different opinion. And we find ourselves in these camps and isolated and then these echo chambers, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the existential crisis of humanity.
Yes.
And it is very important to talk about because just look at social media, right? Now everyone's like, let's jump onto a different platform where we all agree with each other. Yeah. Like that's the last place I want to be. It's just a place where we all agree with each other. Because like, how do we foster deeper connection? My dad and his wife live in, they say they live in LA, Lower Alabama. And she came to this LA and she's so great. She grew up in Kentucky and she's just like this amazing human. She's like, everyone's so nice here in LA. I didn't think people were going to be nice in LA from what I heard. And I said, don't worry, if we interviewed people on the streets of LA and we said, what do you think you would experience if you went to Alabama? There would be some idea or some judgment.
That's right.
And so when we're living in what separates us, we're going to experience more separation. It becomes so profoundly simple. When I believe I am my opinions, then we're going to have to either agree to disagree. But that doesn't foster true connection.
No.
If I understand that I have thoughts, but I'm not my thoughts, I have opinions, but I'm not my opinions, then we can connect at the level of essence. And that's a very different way of living. Then it's okay if we have different points of view. Yeah, I know that may be shocking for someone to hear.
It's shocking for many people to hear. Yeah. And I think that message needs to get out because I think our differences are actually things that actually can create greater understanding and greater bonds and greater acceptance and greater power, because your form of helping others and serving others is not the same form of my serving or helping others, nor should it be.
Right.
You have differences in the way you go about doing things. I have differences in the way I go about doing things. But what if it was all the same solution? What if it was all one flavor, right? What if the whole world was strawberry ice cream? Strawberry ice cream would get old real quick, right? So we actually have these flavor glands and built into our tongue to taste all the different flavors, right? it's like the world. We should be soaking that in and appreciating all of the nuance and all the variations and all the differences. It's beautiful if we can take that mindset, but it does take a mindset.
Yeah.
And going back to your story, like, just the way you came into the world, and I just could see you. I see you now that way, right? But you had this following season where you forgot, I think, as I'm just really oversimplifying it. But was it just the experiences and the way the messages you were receiving, the environment? How much of this is, the environment versus, sort of your DNA and, just the way your composition? What do you think, is going on there with that? Is it an environmental thing?
Well, I mean, that's the age-old question, right? Nature or nurture, right? And there have been obviously extensive studies done on that. And what I have found is, yes, both are true.
Yeah, that's right.
Both can't be true. The exciting place that we're in right now, that I'm grateful to be here on planet Earth at this time, because true science is living in the question. Mm-hmm. It's not having the answer.
That's right.
And yet a lot of times people think science is, here's the answer.
Yes.
But it's really the question, the hypothesis, like, I wonder what this is, right? And to me, that's what true spirituality is as well. And so the exciting time that we're living in scientifically right now is we realize that our DNA isn't as solid as we thought, and that our brain, actually, we get to change our brain.
Yes.
And that's something that, like, the mystics have been saying for, maybe 3,000 years, right? That, like, Buddha really was using spiritual psychology at a time before that term existed, right? It's how am I viewing myself? Quantum mechanics is now showing us that the observer has a profound effect. So if I say it's just my DNA, I have a genetic predisposition to this, that, or the other, and so it is. The observer of that, the naming of that, the claiming of that actually concretizes it. And science is now measuring this. And it will be.
It will be.
And we'll experience that more often. I remember my husband said, I think this whole new thought thing that you're in is pretty accurate. I'm like, say more. And he said, well, I see other people your age, and they're not acting like you do. They're not feeling like you do. They're not presenting like you do. And that's not just genetics or DNA. That's how I'm viewing myself, how I see myself.
That's beautiful.
And that really is available to all of us.
I love that. That is so beautiful. The power of possibility.
That's right.
The power of possibility. And it is such a dynamic way of being. I think one thing that came to me in my journey of recovery and sobriety, I heard this little voice in my head, and it occurred to me, if sobriety was all that was ever intended for me in of itself, that was the totality of my destination, then most likely I would have never gotten loaded in the first place. Because there was a time when I was sober, right? So there's so much more, my point, in the dynamic, technicolor possibilities of life. And I see that in you. It's something that I see. You stay curious. You're like Curious George, even though you're not Curious George, you're Curious TJ. But I just see a beautiful curiosity in you. You just have this insatiable appetite for understanding and insight. And where did that come from? Were you like that as a child? Is that kind of how you were? I
do appreciate you saying that, because I do. That's my intention. My intention is to stay curious.
Clearly,
because curiosity opens and expands. It creates different possibilities. And judgment, which could be said as the opposite of curiosity, restricts us into one way of being. And you're talking about recovery, and you and I are both really passionate about bringing some maybe new ideas into the recovery movement. And one of the old ideas in the recovery movement is some version of I just have this genetic predisposition. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic, and that means this. And then science is now saying, well, you have a brain disease.
Yeah.
And now we're like, well, we're going to move the needle a little, and we're going to say you have a disorder, right? So all of those things impact the way we see ourselves and the way we experience ourselves. And we understand now. I mean, they're going to 100 years from now, someone will look back and say, these guys were just starting to get a little glimpse of what we're talking about, right? We're actually not separate. We're actually all part of one larger experience. We do create our reality based on how we view ourselves. And I remember hearing my friends, and I'm going to say this with as little judgment as possible, but I'm aware that there is going to be a little judgment in this story. But I heard him speak, and he said, I'm 26 years sober, but I'm just a effed up alcoholic, so I don't know how to have relationships. And I thought, how can that be the reality? Yeah. I can't say I have this thing that makes me different than everyone else, and therefore I'm going to put myself in this box and limit myself, because that's not the truth, or that's not the ultimate truth.
That's not the totality of it. Yes. You know, it's so interesting. As I know, we're probably thinking on this conversation and the opportunity inside the conversation. And you just touched on something that I was wanting to talk to you about. So conscious recovery.
Yeah.
And your work and the things that you're doing. There's something that was shared with me recently that reminded me of you, and I think it's really beautiful. And that is a solutionogenic approach versus a pathogenic approach, right? So can we get into can we focus on the solution or the problem, right? Yeah. The pathology or the purpose is another way I like to say that.
Beautiful.
And I see you more in that solutions-based approach, that purpose, that possibility path, and you're not the entirety. To the story you just told, actually, it's kind of putting yourself in a box, right? Yeah. And being attached to that thing, right? Now that thing is there, but that's not the entirety of who you are. It doesn't actually have to define you, and in of itself, it actually doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Yeah. It can be a great thing. So what's your thoughts about that hallucinogenic approach versus the pathogenic approach in the work that you've done? How many books have you published now? Is there like 100? How many books are there?
No. There are 3 books, and there are a series of workbooks. It's only 3. There's 3 books. There's actually we're redoing covers, and I realized I have 15 titles. So there is a lot out there. A lot of them were workbooks or facilitators guides. But I want to speak to what you're saying, because this is the deepest, for me, this is the most important part of this conversation. And it's really what happened for me at that moment when I was suicidal. Please share. I was 18 months sober, roughly, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to live. And I remember telling a few people, like, I want to die. And they were like, don't worry about anything but not drinking. Go help someone else. Your life is a miracle. I'm like, I just told you I want to die. Right. And I met this woman, Mary Helen, and she was the most enlightened being I'd ever met. That's the best way I can describe her. And she would say to me, you're so precious. And I would literally recoil, like, that can't be true. That was not resonating with the core false beliefs and the vibration that I had been so comfortable with. No, I'm damaged, I'm broken, I'm messed up. And so her seeing me, even, and maybe even more importantly than words, was the way she viewed me. And in that experience of working with her, I was transformed, not so much by what she taught, but her viewpoint itself. This is before we were talking about the quantum field, right? But she was, no, I'm not going to see you as broken. I'm going to look beyond all of these limitations that you have put on yourself, and I'm going to see that effervescent, infinite being. And I started then to experience that more.
Can you share what time, when was this? What year was this?
1988.
Wow.
Because I got sober in 1986. So this would have been probably 87, 88, somewhere in that range.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And I started working in the field in 2008 after my existential crisis of I have to make a difference in the world, which was a beautiful thing when I was 40. And I realized that clinicians were trained to pathologize.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? What are your symptoms and how do we help you get rid of them? And of course, there's some merit to that. Absolutely. The intention of the pathologizing is to help someone. Mm-hmm. But what I knew to be true is in the midst of that, they were seeing them as their diagnosis. You're so borderline. He's so bipolar. And in our viewing them in that way, we're actually creating that as an experience.
Yeah, I think the industry, I think the community probably wasn't aware that was happening, though. You know, I mean, to not to just, I think it's a kind of a human nature, a bias toward certain things that we can get sucked into.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, and also there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, right.
There's nothing wrong with that. The question is, what is it creating?
Yes.
Right. And it's creating, one thing is a massive industry. So there might even be an unconscious bias to keep that going. Yeah. I don't know, but I don't think it's conscious.
There's a school of thought there for sure.
And I'm not necessarily in that camp, but what I will say is I discovered something for myself, and that is, if I see myself as broken or damaged, it's exactly how I'm going to see you. And so when I do clinical trainings now,
I love that.
But
Say that again, please.
If I see myself as broken, I will see you as broken. And there's no other possibility.
There's a lot of that going on today.
Yeah.
Even beyond recovery.
Look at politics.
I mean, it's
right.
It is out there.
Yeah.
And it is doing its thing.
Yeah.
People are seeing others as broken because they're seeing themselves as broken as well, right? And
so when I do clinical trainings, I'll say the provocative statement, and that is, the only thing I actually need to do for my client is my own healing, but only 100% of the time.
I love that.
Because if I haven't done enough of my healing, and when I say healing, I'm saying remembering who I am, unlearning the stuff that I've picked up, changing those core assumptions and core beliefs and that vibration, and realizing that maybe I have this diagnosis, maybe I have this condition, but it's not who and what I am. Mm-hmm. And in that knowing and that understanding, I can not only help someone see that for themselves, but that's really what attunement is. Pema Chodron, who I love, a Buddhist teacher, says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It is a relationship between two equals. Only when I know my own darkness well can I be present with yours.
That is so true.
And I will add that only when I know my own light, I can be present with yours as well.
So true. Yeah, you can't really be effective at the thing of trying to help others get to a better place unless you are at first in tune with what's going on with you, and you are committed to this. It's not like you just get the awareness, you get the enlightenment that you are in this place. But I think what I've seen, what I've observed, and I know you believe this too in our conversations, is once you do have that insight, then how are you empowering yourself to grow and to advance and to progress, to help others do the same?
That's right.
Right? You can't bring that positive motion out in somebody else where you're not having that internally within yourself. And that's what was really attractive to me about your message is hearing those themes. I think that one of the things you said about the experience of having to rediscover yourself, and I just think in general, all of us, and the neurology, right, the science and the curiosity of it all. I know we're learning about this in science, but I think the point where we're being programmed, we're receiving these messages, we're hearing this story, and a lot of us, myself included, it was a lie. Like, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything. So many people, have received that message, and we start to really buy in. That becomes who we are, but it's not really the truth.
Right.
I think I talked about, vulnerability, and you push back a little bit because you're like, well, I don't think I'm any extra vulnerable than anybody else. Okay, I'll meet you there. But I do think there's a point in our life cycle, where we happen to be maybe, have a heightened vulnerability because of how we're developing in life, right? Our neural pathways and how susceptible we may be. And so we're all kind of having to go through that, right? And do you have any insights about that?
Yeah, you're speaking to one of my favorite topics because, and I say it's a favorite topic, I don't mean it's so great that all of us got programmed at 7 years old to believe we're damaged or broken,
Right.
but our brains aren't
Thanks for clarifying that.
Our brains aren't even developed at that point, right? And so we have very concrete thinking and we take on something, whether that's the shame of a parent or mommy's mad, I must be bad. At the most extreme, someone who experienced sexual trauma blames themselves.
Yes.
And then we try to help them think their way out of that as an adult. But the truth is the 6-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 4-year-old absorbed and decided, and that's the place we need to do the healing. So like, for example, nothing could be truer or less useful to say to someone it wasn't your fault if they have shame.
Yeah.
Shame needs to be explored and be brought into the light and ask questions like, where did this originate? Well, it originated when I was 5. What were you experiencing at 5? And then what happened with that experience? And almost always it was, I pushed it down. I ran to my room. In the most extreme case, I was hit for having a feeling. It comes down to something so profoundly simple. We need to allow that place within ourselves to actually feel that which didn't get felt before, to experience that which was either too scary or not allowed. In my, back in the day, it was... If you're going to keep crying, I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah, right.
Go to your room till you can stop crying.
Yeah.
Right. So there were very deep messages around it's not okay to feel. And so the deeper work for me has always been, continues to be, but certainly at one period of my recovery and my growth was all about getting in touch with that inner child. What did it really feel like for me at 4 years old to witness these things? What did I absorb? And can I allow myself to actually feel that? Because what I did is I pushed it down. And then, of course, at age 7, the wall came up. And then it was, no one's going to penetrate this, including myself.
Yeah. And as a young boy in that era, not being allowed to feel your emotions or be emotional, and then, having the added layer of sexuality.
Right.
And what was that like? I mean, that had to be, in that time, that had to be,
You don't think it was everyone just loved and accepted me for being this little gay boy in Indiana in the late 60s? I don't know. I laugh, but the truth is it was deeply painful. I was very fortunate in my family system where it was okay. Yeah. But out in the world in Indiana, it was brutal actually. Yeah. And when I was in graduate school, we're going to call it graduate school, but when I was in my advanced studies, let's put it that way, when I was in my 40s, I got to meet that part of myself in a way that I wasn't aware it was still running the show. Because my grandmother, who was born, I think, in 1906, had a gay brother. So that's unheard of. But the denial about that, she never said that. He had a partner. We called them both uncle, but they weren't gay. And I remember being a little kid and running up to him and throwing my arms around him, and he pushed me off and said, boys don't hug men like that, because of his own internalized homophobia, right? And I remember actually feeling it coming into my body. Shame. And, being literally brutalized at school and taunted. And yet somehow that experience became the cornerstone of my work.
Wow.
Right.
And to be exposed to that much hate. Yeah. And then to come out of it so loving is amazing.
And what's interesting about it is, I think in my own journey, I went through it's their fault or that shouldn't have happened. Yeah. And, Buddha, that's the definition of suffering, really. This shouldn't happen, right? There's a difference between pain and suffering. And I was not letting myself feel the pain of that. And when I was in this experience in my 40s, I found myself in class with all of my peers, literally on the floor in the fetal position, sobbing, because I realized how deeply that it affected me. And that,
How old were you then?
I was in my 40s when this was happening.
Wow.
Yeah. When I had the calling to do spiritual work and do work in recovery. And
that's when you let yourself really feel the pain of it all?
Yeah.
At 40?
That all those years later. And I thought that was healed. I would have told you that had been healed.
Yeah. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't it sort of, doesn't it shift your perspective when you realize, walking through your journey, how many other people have this in common? Inside of sexuality, at that dimension, but beyond that,
way beyond that,
right? It comes in many different shapes, sizes, and forms, and it almost knows no limit in how it comes. But pain comes, right? And hurt comes, and trauma comes.
Yeah.
And what do we do about it? How do we help people meet them where they're at, and do it in an effective way, and do it in a way where we can help them sort of be freed from the shame of it all, right? The weight of it all, the pain of it all. What are you doing about that, TJ? How do you do that?
That's where you and I have connected.
Yeah.
Because what I know to be true is it's all about that deeper connection, that attunement. And all attunement means is I'm able to tune into you vibrationally and hold a space for you where I understand that you have the capacity to heal. Because in our industry and the global or the broader behavioral health industry, there seems to be this belief that clients aren't ready to address that. The trauma is too serious. They're not ready. They're not stable.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that before.
And that is often the case.
Yeah.
But it's also not always the case.
Yes.
And if someone can understand who they really are and really tap into the preciousness of themselves, they can heal that. And so our job as a clinician, as a counselor, as a tech, as a therapist, or even as a friend, is to not see that person through the lens of their own brokenness, but to see them through the lens of what's possible. And in that holding, I have witnessed people having the courage to turn toward and heal trauma in ways that's so much more powerful than here's the blueprint and here are the steps that you need to take.
Well, this cannot be put into a box.
That's right.
This cannot be put into a box. We are so complex. We are so beyond what we even comprehend. Yeah. And we want to put it into a box. We want to make it fit into a nice, simple box. But being in a part of humanity in of itself, we are very complex. And I love the fact that you're not willing to take that healing, that approach of caring and supporting, and putting it into a box, because it may just be that one conversation. A conversation that I think you shared with me one time about being on the floor and being a tech. I don't think you were even a clinician, and you had an effective way of meeting people where they were at and helping people to transformation and healing. Do you remember sharing that story with me?
I'm guessing I was the person they called in when someone wanted to AMA, and for anyone listening, it's against medical advice. Yeah. In other words, something got activated, formerly known as triggered, and they were out. And they were either angry, or they were yelling, or they were screaming, or they were shut down. And, my mom was a rager, so being able to be present with someone's anger took me many years. And I was the person they would call in to sit with them when someone wanted to leave. And my mantra as I was walking toward them, there were two things. What they're upset about is not what they're upset about. That I know to be true.
That's
because there's an explosive reaction.
Something underneath.
Yeah, and Bessel van der Kolk says trauma doesn't show up as a memory, it shows up as a reaction. So they're in the reactivity, and my mantra is, I wonder what it really is. I wonder what it really is. And then the second thing I offer myself as I'm walking toward them is, I will look beyond this and see that whole and perfect being within them. I will be able to hold for them that which maybe they're not able to do, and I would just sit with them and let them have their feelings. I know that's very shocking to say that it's that simple. Let me not try to shut this person down, but allow them the space to share what's happening. I'm holding a deeper reality for them. I'm not telling them that, and I'm just asking questions.
And you're just facilitating. You're just making room for this to happen. You're just demonstrating love, can I say?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? I don't want to put words into your mouth.
No,
but
100%.
It sounds very loving what you just described.
Yeah. I mean, one story that is tangible that I can share is a young woman, the tech knocked on her door and said, you have 5 minutes to move downstairs to a room in the basement. And she flew off the handle. She started screaming. I was told by the admissions team I could have this room, and this is the room with the view, and you're not going to make me go down there. And she was, yeah, I'm out of here. And she was packing. And so I met with her, and the tech actually came to me, and he rolled his eyes and said, she's being so entitled. So immediately he was judging the behavior. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, she is exploding. Something big is happening. Yes. I wonder what it is. And I went and sat with her and, of course, let her just talk. I'm not going to change the room anyway. I don't even have the ability to in my role. But I know that's not what she's upset about. And so I just hold that. I hold that. I do actually love her. That's really what I'm doing. Yeah. And she had a moment where she stopped and broke down crying. And said, I was sexually abused in my basement. And she said, I've never told another human being that. And that's when the treatment began. Not only did she not leave treatment, and I'm not saying this because isn't it great that I'm such an amazing magician? Any of us can do that.
Yeah. But that's where I was going. You're not saying it in a way like, oh, look at me.
Yeah, no.
You're looking at, you say it in a way where it's like, it's possible for all of us. So yes. Is it possible for all of us? Is it within, do you believe it's within all of us to do that?
Absolutely. But if I am thinking she's entitled, I can't access seeing her in any different way. Yeah. I'm going to be at odds with the entitlement. There's a part of let's look at it through the lens of a client. There's a part of everyone who wants to do the healing work and wants to stay stuck or wants to run away or wants to be present. And so we end up negotiating with the part of them who wants to leave instead of the part of them that wants to be there. Yes. Or the part of them that's beyond that. Or just in my, I wonder what's going on because this is a really big reaction. And if I react to the reaction, we miss the opportunity. So in some ways, it becomes, you and I have talked about this. Yeah. It becomes almost too simple for me to share this model that is conscious recovery because it really is a philosophical framework. It's not, here's what you do, step 1, 2, and 3. A lot of times therapists, coaches, counselors, they want step 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. Here's the 4 questions I ask. But instead, I'm like, no, we just want to be curious.
That's right.
I just want to be truly present.
That's right.
I want to wonder what's really happening here. And the wisdom is coming from within that person, not from within me.
I see you that you've identified, you saw this power of connection and you were compelled to sort of unpack it because you knew the possibility within it. And I want to ask you to continue on doing what you're doing because it's important work. And that's what this podcast is all about, is the power of human connection. And almost more than anyone that I've had on this show, you embody it, and I really appreciate it. You talked about a mantra, and there's a mantra I want to share with you that I have been given, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on it. And it was a life changer for me. It altered my life. Excuse the pun, but it did in a radical way. And it was very simple when it came to me, and it was, I will not be moved. And what I got from that was that every time that programming, that lie, that false story came in, the accusations, all that was never even part of me, my being, every time I gave it ear and I allowed it to move me, it pushed me further away from where I was intended to be and what I could become and how I could be used and my purpose. And it moved me closer to destruction. What's your understanding about that? How do you connect with that?
My experience is similar to yours in that when I had this awareness that I wanted my life to have more meaning and purpose, and I had an inkling of what that was, and I chose to go back to school, everything in my life collapsed. I lost my business, my partner, my house, my car. And I was brought to a place, and there are so many layers to the story, but it ultimately culminated in a legal experience that I got to experience at 20-something years sober in school to become a spiritual teacher. And it resulted in me having a fundamental choice. And my lawyer came to me one day and said, you have two choices. You're going to throw him under the bus, or you're going to throw yourself under the bus. And I said, there's no choice there. And he said, well, of course not. And I said, I'm not throwing him under the bus. And he said, did you hear what I just said? And the reason that that's an important pivotal moment in my journey is I understood at that point that all of this was happening because I had this higher calling. And to be, even more transparent with that, the higher calling required me to look at the areas of my life where I wasn't living that integrity. So I'm not saying I didn't have any culpability in what was happening. What I am saying is I had spent a lot of years like, I could just kind of fudge this a little or do that a little. Yeah. And I knew that was a moment. Right there was this moment. Regardless of what's going to happen as a result of me saying, I guess I'm throwing myself under the bus, it was a moment spiritually that I understood very deeply was necessary if I'm truly going to do this work. If I'm truly going to live this reality. And what came out for me was I understood at that point that regardless of what happened, there was a place within me that's unharmable. And I ended up going to jail at 20-something years sober for 108 days. And it was a result of me choosing to take the hit.
Man.
It was a business deal. My friend had relapsed. He'd stolen a bunch of money, and he'd accused me. And I was like, and I had good friends that said, well, if you really didn't do it, I know you wouldn't have done that. Right. Okay.
Bias toward judgment.
But I'm the one who gets to live with that decision.
That's right.
And all I said to my lawyer is like, I want to put my head on the pillow every night for the rest of my life, and I'm up to something bigger than what's happening in the physical world. And when I just did that, which was not easy, not free of pain, but I knew that was the transformation that was required. I knew that I had to move toward that pain. And it was in that experience that so much of what I'm doing today was born.
It's very heroic. I mean, you had to be heroic for yourself in that moment. I heard somebody say that, a hero is just an ordinary person who finds the ability to be courageous in the midst of adverse circumstances. And that was very adverse. You needed to find that for yourself, and if you didn't, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be.
And the thing I want to be clear. I'm not saying like, oh, look how admirable I am that I did that.
No.
I was like, I can't choose to throw him under the bus and live with it. And there are a lot of layers to it that we don't want to get into. I'm not saying that I didn't have a part in creating the mess that it was, because I certainly did.
Yeah.
But I knew at that moment that there was something so much more important than a piece of paper or 108 days or whatever was going to come from that. I knew that what I was up for was transformation. And all I mean by that is, am I going to actually live this?
It's so wonderful.
Am I going to actually live it? Because anyone can talk about these things.
Can you actually do it?
And that's a moment in a day-to-day choice that I get to make.
You took the action. And I'm so glad that you did. And we're going to close up here, but I got to tell you, it's been everything that I thought it was going to be and a lot of that I didn't understand that it would be. And it's been wonderful. I did prepare something for you. I'm sure you've heard this quote, but it just reminded me of you, and I wanted to share it with you. Mary Ann Williamson says that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous. And this reminds me of you. And so keep walking in it, keep taking the action, keep touching lives. You're doing a wonderful job, and thank you for being on the Altered Life podcast.
Oh my gosh, Michael, it's been truly an honor, and that's one of my favorite quotes. So I so appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing in the world and creating this space where we could, actually be vulnerable and talk about a deeper reality.
Will you come back?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and we can do the next episode.
Thanks so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Altered Life podcast. We hope today's episode left you inspired, informed, and ready to take on new challenges. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from today's insights. You can connect with us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, or visit alteredlifepodcast.com to join our community and stay updated on all things human connection. Until next time, remember, stay connected. The power of human connection is unlimited. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.